Imagine half your website visitors bounce just because it takes a half second too long to load. Pretty scary, right? Web performance isn't just about speed. It's about keeping your users engaged while delivering on business outcomes as fast as possible. Welcome to the first episode of Web Currents, a video series from Adobe where we dive deep into the latest trends and insights in web development. I'm Ron Nagy, and today we're going to unpack core web vitals and share some practical strategies for optimization. On the show today, we have Lars, a principal from the Adobe Experience Manager team, and Rakesh, an app dev engineer from Amazon Alexa, and an Adobe AEM champion. They will share their guidance and expertise on understanding and improving web performance. Let's go. How do you define what performance metrics that you're targeting, right? Once you get those metrics and you get those performance targets, on the architecture and the development side, there's a bunch of different things that you can do to bring an experience to life. So how do you determine what direction to take?
For us, it really started with defining the yardstick, right? What do you understand as web performance? And what we settled on pretty quickly was that we said, we take whatever is Google's yardstick. They know a lot about the web, given that they run quite popular website. I've heard they've also published a web browser that is quite popular among some people, right? So they know a thing or two about web performance, and the way they are structuring and evolving the core web vital is a really good example of this, right? The three metrics are, the first one is largest contentful paint. And this is basically the thing that is the most prominent visual on your page, right? The thing that your visitors care about the most. And it's one of the hardest metrics to get right. You only get there by ruthless prioritization. Anything that's not required to render the LCP should get out of the way and to the back of the line. The second one is cumulative layout shift. The best way to describe cumulative layout shift is how jumpy is your site going to be during the load process. There are a couple of things that influence cumulative layout shift. One part is, there are just a couple of mistakes you can do, like not giving a height and width to your images, which means the browser doesn't know how big it is, puts in placeholder, then when the image gets loaded, it pushes itself into the right place and everything else moves around. The second thing that we often see is web fonts. You start with the default font, then you load your brand font. Your brand font has slightly different shapes and slightly different sizes, which means that at least your headlines are moving by a couple of pixels. And if you're really unlucky, all your copy text is moving around as well, right? LCP and CLS are always competing against each other, right? It's a really hard trade-off. The last one is interaction to next paint. And the best way I would describe it is how sluggish your site feels. When you click something, when you type something, how slowly does it move? Interaction to next paint is a relatively new metric. It only became an official core web vital metric this year, and it replaced first input delay. The interesting thing about this is that first input delay was essentially the one guaranteed green metric that you could achieve. INP is much harder to achieve consistently. One of the reasons for this is if you are loading a lot of JavaScript on your site, if there's a lot of processing happening in the background, basically your visitors' CPU cycles are going to be tied down, which means they can't react to user input quickly enough. Your site is going to feel slow, and that's a bad experience, right? When you dive into the deeper science of these core web vitals, it's really interesting because Google offers you PageSpeed Insights tool, which is a really great way of measuring performance in a way that you cannot cheat. I know a great trick to great web performance, which is to buy the biggest and beefiest computer that Apple is going to sell you, then load your own page on localhost, make sure that you've loaded it a couple of times so that the cache is properly saturated, then run a local lighthouse score test, take a screenshot and celebrate that you've achieved the 100. That's one way of doing it. The right way of doing it is to go to PageSpeed Insights, because that's a computer that you don't control, on a throttled network connection that Google is controlling, and then take that screenshot, right? It's going to come out worse than what you expected. In PageSpeed Insights, you see your score and you can click on the score details, and then there's another click that shows you for each metric how it's being calculated. And what Google is doing is for every core web vital metric, they have a good, needs improvement, and I always call it good, meh, and bad range. The fascinating thing is that they're basically looking at an S-curve of user response to performance. Right? At a certain point, getting faster won't give you anything useful. If you go from 800 milliseconds to 500 milliseconds, not going to make a big difference. If you go from 500 to 200 milliseconds, despite needing a time machine for this, not going to make a difference. And then they have a second point on this S-curve, which is when your performance is so bad that it doesn't matter anymore. Only the most patient souls are going to wait longer than 10 seconds. They might even wait 20 seconds, but it's only 5 people in the world. So based on these 2 points, the range for good, meh, and bad has been defined, which is a really nice way of doing it, because it's not just Google making up numbers, but it's Google doing the googliest thing ever, pulling out the big book of math and sigmoid curves and putting it all in a nice software tool. So that's where we started, and that's what we operate with. And then only when it comes to diagnostics, this is when we pull out the more advanced metric, right? When it comes to why are we getting this bad INP? Well, it's probably because of total blocking time and so on. And these are tools that you can get on PageSpeed Insight as a lighthouse score, as a lab test. But I see this really as a secondary metric. The top 3 are the core web vital. They're well supported. There's a lot of science behind it, and you can measure them on a great array of devices, which we really like.
Thank you for that level setting on Core Web Vitals, because you're right. Google wrote the book, if you will, on measuring web performance from their perspective. You think of PageRank and ranking websites based on what they're connected to, but also ranking websites that are actually functional. They don't want to have a bad experience on their side either. So it makes sense for them to invest in this space. So Rakesh, are Core Web Vitals something that you're utilizing or something that you look at to try and determine what changes need to be made or what you can do to improve those?
Yeah, exactly. So we also rely on Core Web Vitals, and we even use Core Web Vitals based APIs as well to verify and to automate the process of testing before we even push those changes to production environments. For example, we started with images. We found that optimizing assets would be really helpful to decrease the bounce rates and increase the performance of the web on the whole. One of the Core Web Vitals is directly tied to the image optimization, if I'm not wrong. So what we have done is we have built a custom tool internally, which would automate the process of converting the images which the content author would upload. So if they have uploaded JPEG or PNG assets, then we would create rendition for those actual images. The renditions would be in the form of WebP. So there is the image magic to have that conversion created on the fly, and our custom logic would try to identify if there is a WebP rendition for a particular step before it starts rendering the actual app, right? So the backup plan is to render the actual asset they have uploaded, but the first check we would do is whether we have WebP image asset. So we have done this on like top 25 pages because we want to understand the impact of this change. We reduce the bounce rates from 70% to like 50 or 55, if I'm not wrong, for those top 25 pages. So I would recommend to understand what are the pain points and then make a decision of your own. What exactly your area of focus in terms of the metrics.
Awesome. So Lars, in terms of the tooling that Google provides to help developers, what's available for folks who are looking at optimizing their largest contentful paint or some of the other metrics that you had mentioned? Rakesh was saying that they have automated some of those reports. Is that something that we're doing as well, that other customers, that you're seeing other customers?
In Edge delivery services, but also in Adobe Experience Manager as a cloud service, you basically get a built-in check against the PageSpeed API. For Edge delivery services, when you open a pull request and you don't provide an example URL, we actually fail the pull request and say, sorry, I don't know what this is. So then the next thing is that you say, okay, here's the URL. And then we send PageSpeed Insight against it. And if it's not coming back the green lighthouse score, we also fail the build. Internally, we're actually saying that lighthouse score is a binary metric. Right? It's either 100 or it's not. The reason for this is it's incredibly hard from a psychological perspective to stay at 100 and to get back to 100. You will always find reasons to justify why 90 is good enough. When you've gotten to the point where you've rationalized 90, you can also rationalize 80. And so the downward slide begins, right? For most organizations, it really ends somewhere in the 30s and 20s, where there are very few things that you can apply to make things work. But getting back to 100 basically seems like an unsurmountable task. That's why I'm always saying there are two ways to get to great performance. One is you take your existing site and you pick a particular metric and then you attack it until you've won, and then you go to the next one. The other one is you start with a site that is at 100, and then you still need to fight, right? You still need to be disciplined to stay at 100. The latter approach is the one that we are offering by saying, we've got all the best practices out of the box included. And all of the best practices, that's the other part, right? It's going all across the stack. For a lot of people, they would say, well, the stack is going down as deep as the CDN. In reality, your DNS also makes a difference. On the other hand, it's going up to the very, very fine details, like we discussed font-induced CLS, right? This is the discussion that you need to have with your designers, because your designers are going to say, well, I need this font because without Adobe Clean, what are we? And then you might say, well, with Adobe Clean, we are a company that is losing 20% of visitors on the first bounce. It's quite hefty dependency to load, right? It's something that through loading it cleverly without font display swap and optional font display, we can say, well, and everybody who is returning and everyone who has the patience to go to the next click is going to get our font in all its glory, and it's going to look perfect, right? And that's a trade-off that is going to the very top of the stack, right? Where you talk about design sensibilities versus performance sensibilities. This is really discipline and cultural. Establishing these metrics and making them front and center in everybody's mind is a really important thing. And it's also something that we encourage our customers to not just treat as a technology question, but really treat it as what it is. It's a business question, right? Because your performance translates directly into business outcome. And we are seeing this all over the place, right? One of our commerce customers had failing Core Web Vitals. Now they are winning Core Web Vitals and outpacing in terms of performance their competition by a mile. And the interesting part of this is that they are reaping the benefits in terms of additional traffic and in terms of additional organic search traffic. Right? In the beginning, they were essentially ranked only for branded keywords. Now you can search for the general category and they're becoming competitive. Right? And that's exactly the place where you want to be, where Google is saying, this is a great site and we know that it's a great site, and elevating it. Google is saying, we are not penalizing you for having bad Core Vital. We're just elevating everybody else for having great ones. That's working for a while, right? But once your competition starts catching up, you're basically being forced to invest and to improve.
Lars, I know from all the work we've done with customers around edge delivery services and the mindset shift that happens when you go from getting a website out and then fixing the challenges or the problems or the rough edges after it's pushed out, to pushing a website out that is at 100 and is only going to get pushed out when it is at 100, starting at 100 and maintaining that 100 all along with every incremental change is a mindset shift, I think, for most of our customers.
Over the last year, we've worked with more than 100 customers on go lives, and we did a couple of things to get to this point, right? One was that in the very first pitch, we promised the customers a Lighthouse score of 100. We wanted to frame this one number as something that we all knew that it's something that we are aspiring to. The second thing that we did was that we set an extremely aggressive go live date for all of these projects, because now you have a forcing function. Right? You want to make your go live date ideally in 1 month from now. With this forcing function, we have defined performance, we have defined date. That means everything else, especially the scope, now subject to negotiation. Right? When you look at most websites, they have stuff on there that nobody is ever using, that is not useful. That's one of the secrets, right? The biggest thing that you can do in order to improve performance is to do less. That's super counterintuitive, right? In the software industry, we've been used to a world where no matter how bad our coding practices were, we could always rely on Intel shipping a new version.
Exactly.
That would fix all of our performance issues.
Yep.
And that's no longer the case. Because now, with mobile devices in everybody's pocket, it's not just raw CPU speed that matters, right? It's also battery life. And now device manufacturers are making trade-offs that are way less favorable to, let's say, sloppy coding practices. And that means we go back to the point where we say, we are not going to do this. We are not going to put this additional framework in. We're not going to put this additional dependency in. We're not going to put additional marketing technology into our tag manager. yes, we know it's easy to do this, but we also know what the negative impact of it is, and we know how hard it is to stop once you've started. So our approach was put the 100 front and center, make everyone aware of it. Everyone is promising, yes, we want to reach that number. Number two, set very aggressive deadlines and then deliver on that. And that established within our own team, but also within our partner base and our customer base, an expectation, right? And the expectation is, if I'm starting with Edge delivery services, I will be able to go live in 4 weeks, and I will be able to get a Lighthouse score of 100. That's a fantastic promise, right? It gets you to results faster, and it gets you faster results. And that's all we care about.
Yeah, for sure. So, Rakesh, I'm guessing that you have the same kind of challenges of measuring performance and then looking at what changes you can put into place. Is that measurement of performance part of the push to production when you do changes? Is that something where you're testing against Core Web Vitals or something else to make sure that whatever new changes that you put into place doesn't negatively impact that? Is that kind of part of the culture at Amazon?
Yeah, for sure. We really obsess our customers, right? So we do not want it to create unpleasant experiences for our customers, obviously. So for that reason, even before we start fixing something, we work backwards on how can we really verify and make sure that this really is not going to break the experience of the customer, right? And coming back to the challenges, we do have several challenges when we work on the project. We are sort of a lead team within this org, and we are thinking of like, hey, do we really need to update all 20 image-based components we have at one go, or do we need to identify the high priority image component, right? Like a banner component. So we even get a weighted matrix to understand whether it is like, the fold or above the fold. If this component is on several pages or 10 pages or 20 pages of Core 25, then we make the component as P0 and we first work on the component. And then we really understand the value of that effort that we have put in before we pick up other component in the list, right? So in that way, we were able to complete this exercise in 4 phases. So we were able to update all the 20 components that we have. And obviously, we were able to see some improvements in terms of bounce rate and even the experience itself across all the devices like desktop, mobile, and tablet. We even think about all different types of customers. Some customers may have like 5 MB, who knows, right?
Yeah.
So we need to come up with a threshold and we need to make sure we always develop and test based on those thresholds when we ship the product.
Right. The lowest common denominator amongst all of your customers in terms of the connection speed and devices that they may or may not have. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's great. So I'm curious, Rakesh, for Amazon, when the web strategy team or web marketing team comes and says, we want to build a new front page that highlights this with a carousel or some functionality that is new, and you have to build new components for that, how do you approach introducing new technologies and at the same time not impacting performance?
Yeah. So recently we started exploring React framework, whether we want to go with React or we want to continue with existing frameworks which we have. So when we thought of creating search experiences like search bar, search page on React, we then started thinking about like, hey, how can we really make sure that existing metrics will not go down using this new React framework? Then we started making updates to our automation test suite to make sure that we are capturing all these details in terms of metrics and everything, Core Web Vitals, page load time, speed index and everything. We even do some keywords before we even start the implementation, right? Whether this is going to be natively impacted or whether it is going to enhance the developer experience. So we do a lot of internal testing or evaluation. Even with the business users, we do some demos as well and make sure that we get their buy-in before we start even the implementation. Coming to our development team, we collaborate highly with our QA and automation team and make sure that their metrics or their test suites are updated to capture even the POC we start working, right? Everything is visible on the dashboard, right? So we make sure that we've tracked everything and then we make sure that we introduce this technology, nothing is going to be well.
Right on. That's cool. Is there anything that you guys want to mention in terms of web performance that we haven't covered so far?
Yeah, so one thing that just came to mind, right, is Rakesh, you mentioned React, and React is a great framework. It has been around about as long as jQuery has been when React was new, right? And the interesting thing that happened to jQuery was that the best features of jQuery got adopted by the web platform. Right? So one part of this was that jQuery worked around browser incompatibilities. We don't have these anymore. Right? You almost never do if-else checks based on user agent. It has been decades, knock on wood, since I had to do this the last time. And then things like document query selector all. Right? It's easy to forget, but that's something that jQuery invented. Right? And that was so good that the web platform adopted it. And the same thing has happened over the past 10 years without a lot of people noticing to React, where the best features have been adopted by the platform. A lot of the things where you would say, well, I need a framework for this, the web platform now has built in.
Yeah.
So do you want to have an autocomplete on a form field? There's an HTML element for that. Right? Do you want to have a modal dialog? There's an HTML element for that. Do you actually want to style the overlay? There's not an HTML element, but it's CSS pseudo element for this. Right? And this is a really great development to see how the platform is working in conjunction with its users. Right? React users are users of the platform, and the platform is absorbing the best things, which then means you can go back to what the platform does best, which is if you stick to the basics, if you stick to what's built in, you can get great performance, right? Because the web was built around this idea of being scalable, being performant. And a lot of the things that we add on top are just weighing it down. That would be my closing remarks, right? The web as a platform is fantastic. It's built for performance, and we can use that raw power to create excellent experiences.
That's great. So I think your rallying cry is simplify. Like,
Yeah.
distill it down to the basics and it will fly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Rakesh, any final parting thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to make some recommendation here on how can we tackle existing web properties or websites to make them more performance oriented, right? Like increase the performance. So try not to like tackle everything at one shot. Prioritize on what exactly important for the business, whether it is images or whether it is client libraries or whether it is page performance on the whole, or whether it is rendering the first person to the page first, to understand more about your business and then come up with the access plan based on your particular business. So for us, what's most important is we should not be compromising the quality of the image, but we should be optimizing the image of the thing, right? Maybe you can like have multiple rendition to like 70% is quality, 80% is compression quality, and 100% compression quality, and give the option to content authors. And also not to worry much about removing everything at one shot, like unused JavaScript, unused CSS, or even some asset. Try not optimize those. Try only like optimizing or compressing or even compressing the client libraries which you are actually using and which you already have control on. Because for some of the third-party libraries, you may not be having that much control on. So you must be having control on your 1P client libraries, right? So try to use Google Chrome browser, as Lars said, to use that tool to understand what exactly you guys are using and try to focus on improving the ones which you are using and try to deprioritize unused properties or unused client libraries for the next go or for the next.
That's
So
great.
one thing that a lot of people who are developing on AEM are familiar is David's model, right? David Nuchel's 10 rules for content modeling. I'm always calling David's law of inverse utility, which is that the size of a dependency is inverse proportional to the utility of the dependency, right? So the bigger the dependency, the less useful it is. We used to observe this in the Java world, where for a long time, one of the biggest dependencies that we had in AEM or in CQ at the time was FOP, which was the formatting objects processor, essentially fantastic Apache library to generate PDFs. And you might ask, what do you need PDF generation for in a web content management system? And that's exactly the point, right? Your biggest dependency has the smallest utility. And we see exactly the same thing on the client side. Just open your page, open the list of dependencies, order them by size. And the things that are on top of the list are going to be the things that are the easiest to remove, the easiest to replace. That's David's law of inverse utility.
There you go.
It's a great guidance for simplification.
Excellent. Excellent.
Rakesh, if you're ever in the market for an Edge Delivery Services demo, a personalized one, let me know. And
No pressure.
if I need to fly out to Seattle for that, I will happily do that.
There you go. Sounds
Yep.
like a plan.
Thank you guys so much.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
And that wraps up our first episode of Web Currents. We hope you found these insights valuable. Remember, embrace a measurement and performance mindset, leveraging PageSpeed Insights from Google or tools from within Adobe Experience Manager. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for watching Web Currents, and happy coding!